At the height of their power, these empires looked unstoppable. Rome's legions marched like an iron tide, carving roads and aqueducts that carried life itself across their world. The Mongols thundered over the steppes, their arrows falling like storms before enemies even saw them coming. The British flag fluttered on every horizon, its navy wrapping oceans in chains of trade and conquest. Yet behind the glory, cracks were forming, quiet at first, then loud enough to bring down giants. And when the collapse came, it was swift, brutal, and utterly human. Welcome to Lost Realms Archive, where the past is never silent. Here we uncover the rise, the triumph, and the heartbreak of civilizations that once believed they could rule forever. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear is not just history, it's a mirror reflecting us today. Think of an empire like a giant tree. It starts as a seed, grows into something towering, spreading roots and branches until it seems eternal. But just like trees, empires can rot from within or fall to storms they never saw coming. Rome was that tree. From a small city on the banks of the Tiber, it rose with grit and discipline. Roman legions were like machines in human form, drilled to fight in perfect formation. Roads stitched their vast territory together, while aqueducts carried fresh water into crowded cities. Their laws, their language, even their calendar, they built a world that felt indestructible. Imagine walking through Rome at its peak. Marble temples gleaming, markets filled with spices from the east, gladiators fighting in the Colosseum before roaring crowds. For ordinary Romans, it must have felt like living at the very center of the universe. But prosperity carries its own dangers. Corruption crept in like rot at the roots of that mighty tree. Senators grew rich while farmers struggled. Soldiers fought not for Rome itself, but for rival generals promising wealth and power. Money lost its value. Bread cost more than families could afford, and trust in the empire cracked. And then, from the north and east, came waves of invaders. To a Roman citizen, it must have felt like watching the ground vanish beneath your feet. One day you lived in the eternal empire. The next, that eternity was gone. Rome shows us how the mighty fall. But the story doesn't end there. Because while Rome collapsed slowly, another empire rose with terrifying speed. The Mongols. Imagine endless plains stretching to the horizon, and from that horizon thunder, horsemen, thousands of them moving like a storm front. At their head was Genghis Khan, once just Temujin, the son of a broken family, now the man who would unite scattered tribes into a single unstoppable force. His genius was not just in war but in vision. He saw the world as something to be taken, one kingdom after another. The Mongols were unlike any army the world had seen. On horseback, they could travel distances in a day that other armies would take weeks to cross. Their bows could pierce armor from far away, and their tactics confused enemies who never knew if they were facing a retreat or an ambush. Entire cities surrendered without a fight, terrified by stories of what happened to those who resisted. For ordinary people, the Mongol Empire was both terror and opportunity. Merchants traveled safely along the Silk Road under Mongol protection, but for villagers in their path, the fear was overwhelming. You could lose everything overnight, and yet even the largest land empire in history couldn't escape the cracks. When Genghis Khan died, the unity he held together began to splinter. His heirs divided the empire into khanates, fragments of a dream that once seemed eternal. The Mongols had conquered the world with speed, but they could not hold it together with time. The rise of the Mongols leaves us with a haunting question. If even the greatest conqueror's dream could fracture, what hope does any empire truly have? Centuries later, the center of power shifted, not to horsemen, but to ships, and the sails that filled the oceans belonged to Britain. The British Empire was not just large, it was global. By the 19th century, it controlled nearly a quarter of Earth's land and population. Picture this: a child born in India, a miner in South Africa, a farmer in Canada, an official in Australia, all living under the same crown. People said the sun never set on the British Empire because at any given moment, daylight touched some part of it. How did Britain manage this? Through trade, industry, and above all, its navy. Their ships ruled the seas, carrying goods, soldiers, and culture across the globe. The Industrial Revolution gave them factories, and weapons that outpaced rivals. To many in Britain, it must have felt like destiny itself, that they had been chosen to rule the world. But global rule is heavy, like trying to hold water in your hands. The two world wars of the 20th century drained Britain of its wealth and manpower. Meanwhile, colonies that had long been subjects began demanding freedom. For those living under empire, independence was the long-awaited dawn. For Britain, it was the slow setting of a sun they once thought eternal. But the British were not the first to fade, nor the last. Other empires rose and fell in their shadows. The Ottomans ruled for centuries at the crossroads of East and West. The Persians built roads and systems of governance that became blueprints for others. Spain grew rich on silver from the Americas, while the Qing dynasty in China commanded the lives of hundreds of millions. Every one of them, no matter how mighty, met the same end. And here's where history whispers a pattern. Empires fall for the same reasons. Again and again, they stretch too far, trying to control lands and peoples beyond their reach. They rot from within as leaders grow corrupt and ordinary people lose faith. Their economies stumble, their rivals grow stronger, and suddenly, what looked eternal crumbles overnight. A historian once said that the more complex a society becomes, the more costly it is to sustain. At some point, the weight becomes too much. The system collapses under its own greatness. Which brings us to a question that should make us pause. If Rome fell, if the Mongols splintered, if Britain's empire vanished, what about today? Look at the world around us. The United States, China, and other global powers shape trade, technology, culture, and military might on a scale the ancients could never dream of. Are these modern empires immune to the cycle of rise and fall? Or are they walking the same path, unaware of the cracks beneath their feet? No empire in history ever thought it would fall until it did. And if history repeats itself, what will be the sign, the moment when today's giants begin to crumble? That answer may be closer than we think, and it might change how we see the world right now.